and we never knew which party is going to visit us, if they were Germans or this Russians, renegades, or Soviets with the Soviet army. And Soviet army, by the way, was very good in this respect. They were very concerned about equipment. So one of the things before they would go to sleep, they would always dig a place that the truck would be parked on an angle so that the engine would be lower than the opening the ground so that the truck could move if they got hit. And anyhow, so finally they could deal with the guys in the hills, but they couldn't get to get to Budapest. So they brought in, and they figured that the only way the battle they can get it is by marching up the hill. So they declared it a major battle for Budapest, and penal battalions were brought in, which was quite a thing because those guys were treated a bit like animals to some extent, but they would give them the night before they could get some alcohol to drink. They were also didn't have access to any women when they were in the penal battalions. But they did get an orders. Next day you march up the hill, and they finally took the Budapest, which I'm not sure if it was end of 44 or beginning of 45. That was how Budapest fell. And we were there. And then by that time when it finally, that was before the war ended, but they were already marching to Vienna, we were sent to repatriation home. The Russian prisoners of war didn't really want to go because after this General Vlasov second time defected, the first time he was caught as a prisoner of war, the second time he defected, and Stalin after that became a rule, or you didn't need the laws. The directive from Stalin was enough that if you were caught as a prisoner of war, you could never be commissioned officer again, because he was so burned with this.
So what did the Russians do with the parents? Right? What did the Russians do with the prisoners of war, the Polish, including your father?
I don't know what they did.
But what did they do with your father and his colleagues?
Oh, no, what they did with my father, they were prisoners of war of different, they were also Western allies. There was a repatriation center, and everybody other than Russians, I don't know what's happening, it's Russians, but all the others were sent to the countries where they belonged, like we were sent to Krakow from there.
But Krakow was still under.
Not by the time when we were sent.
It was under Russian.
But Krakow was
in 45.
Krakow was really.
I was in Krakow when the war ended.
Okay.
Because I remember I was on the roof of a building and they were shooting things up in the air.
So then you moved back to Krakow before.
We didn't move. We were moved.
They moved them.
Yeah, but.
Because my town was Soviet Union.
I understand. You are liberated by the Russians in Budapest.
Yes.
They have, if they sent you.
No, they had a repatriation center that was operated not just by Russians, but there were French people, American people, Polish people.
Where was
the Allies were there.
Where was this camp? Where was it?
It was, I think, east of Budapest. I don't remember the town.
So how did you get to Krakow? Because Krakow was still under the German, no?
No.
Krakow was liberated before, towards the end of 1944 or early 1945. I came to Krakow in 1945, and Krakow was Polish at that time. But the town where I belonged was Soviet Union. So they took us, we came from this camp to go to Poland, and then you went to Poland, and in Poland there was half of Poland was moved to Eastern Germany. So there were tremendous. This is the savage continent story.
Yeah.
And that was probably the toughest time of the war for me, this whole thing. Because it was really rough, the end of the war.
So what happened during the end of the war?
No,
how did it work?
the siege of Budapest, not knowing whether you see, like I got hit by the Soviet guy and he shot on the ground. My mother got scared that somebody got shot, and all kinds of goodies.
No, but then,
and then we were put on a train of repatriation to Poland, which is organized by Poles, not by Russians anymore, just like English or French would. Now, there were the Allied representatives. This camp was multinational, not camp really, it was a transfer point, repatriation center.
So what I'm understanding is the whole time that you were in camps and there was a little bit of order, you were pretty much protected. And then things were breaking down.
That plus when we left Poland really was the worst part of when I was in displaced person camp in Germany after we left Poland again.
So what, after Krakow was liberated,
No,
you were there?
No, we came to repatriation.
Okay, right. What happens later? How did you, basically, after 45, 46, what happened after the war? You said this was the worst time after the war. So
Right.
what happened along this way? What happened?
No,
later?
so we came to this repatriation center and we were told, now the repatriation train to Poland is going to leave on that and this day, and we got those boxcars. You know, it was a freight train. It wasn't a, and we thought we were very wise. So in our thing, they built some cots, two-story cots, so some people could sleep. The only problem is it wasn't built by engineers, and they didn't realize that those cots started to fall, and I think one of those cots landed on my dad's head because this train was going through those Carpathian Mountains again. And we were given a couple of orders. When we were going through the mountains there, we were told that all the people have to get off the train because the locomotive couldn't pull the train up, and all the men will be pushing the train to help the locomotives. So we got on the other side, and we were told not to keep the sliding doors too high up, and they gave us the spades and handle of spades and saying, there are some Ukrainian terrorists, so if you see anybody trying to jump on the train, just hit them with the spade, so they don't. So we were going down the train, and we came, our train, and I don't know if every train went there, we went to Krakow, and I forget where we were, and then once we were there, you arranged to get a place to live and to try to look for a job or something of that sort.
It was arranged by the Russian or the Polish government?
No, there was Polish. Because there was Polish government.
So the Russian wasn't really managing the city after the occupation, after the liberation? They let the Polish...
the Polish. Yeah. But you see, for example, this Marshal Malinowski became Polish defense minister and a very powerful man was Berman. I forget what his first name was Jewish guy who was secretary of the Communist Party, and he was sort of representing Stalin in Polish affairs. And when we came, so we started to go, and my mother found out that her first cousin is in Polish government now as a High Commissioner for Wiedergutmachung, reparations or whatever. So
what was his name?
Sommerstein, Emil Sommerstein.
And he was in the government.
He was quite he was one of the early Zionists. He used to go to all these Zionist meetings with.
And then he was
Grandpa
a
showed
member
us
of the
the paper.
parliament, or of the government, a Polish liberated.
After he got out of prison, that's another long story. I think when the Russians came in '39, they took a lot of people that were involved and they put them in prison. They put him in prison. When the Russians came in '41, they all of a sudden became allies of allies, right?
Yeah.
And they had formed, there were two Polish governments. There was a right wing in London and very communist wing in Moscow. And what they wanted to have some names that are not associated with communist background. They wanted to have some, he used to be a Polish parliamentarian because Lwów had a big Jewish population and he was in Polish Knesset, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So they forced him to take a position and he accepted it after sitting there, because then he was told, you have a choice, you can either be in government or stay in prison until you die. So he said, he accepted, but he set up two conditions, and that was one, that he will be able to attend the Zionist meetings that he was very much interested in, and that he will have a non-political position, and took this High Commissioner for Reparation. So my mother found that he's in Warsaw. She went to Warsaw and saw him, and he had a connection, and that's Zosia went to medical school in Wrocław, and my father had choice a few positions because they talked to this fellow Berman, and he decided to go to Chorzów, which was Königshiet in German, the town was called, as a physician for the coal industry for that region, because he had a choice either to take over as a health commissioner for Stettin or this one, and he decided to take this position in Silesia.
And Zosia, by the way, thought they should have stayed in Poland. She should have finished.
That I should also.
Stay in Poland. She could have finished medicine, and your father could have got to the
that was
university, and that was the thing that she had against Lonek, that he took, kind of.
Convinced us to leave Poland and then just dropped us when we were there.
He convinced you, or he kind of forced?
Not forced, but he convinced us that he arranged supposedly everything to go to. We were going to South America, I think, I forget which country it was that he.
Speaking of South America, what's happening in Venezuela?